Hi everyone. Well, I've decided to put the last week's PowerPoints into one PowerPoint because for the Bruner article, which is for Wednesday, um, it's one quick slide and then I have a TED Talk and a video that I want you guys to watch. So, with that said, we are mainly going to be focusing on authenticity and tourism. So, one of the things that I want you guys to kind of do is take a few minutes, um, pause the video after the slide, and think about what authenticity means to you. What is an authentic experience? So pause the video, think about that, and then start back up when you're ready. Okay, so in order to understand what these authors are talking about, for the most part, we need to start with Goffman. Goffman has these different ways of what he says people do. So you have one way that you're showing everyone. So that's, he kind of gives the example of a theater. So in the theater, you have the front stage. That's the public arena, what everyone sees. And then you have the backstage. And for Goffman, the front stage is equivalent to your public persona and what you show to people. The backstage is a more what you do when no one else is looking. So, how this really comes into play as far as tourism is concerned is the different areas that are possible within a tourist site that can be considered authentic. So, in my dissertation, I use McConnell's 6 levels of backstage to show the different levels of authenticity that a site can have. I won't go into them completely in detail because that can be kind of boring. But the fact of the matter is that depending on the authentic experience that a tourist wants to have depends on what areas of the site that they see. Okay, so I'm going to start with Yuri. He is very important to um, the whole notion of tourism and study of tourism. So, Yuri says that what we look at is important and how we see the landscape is very culturally constructed. An example is my work on video game tourism. There are multiple narratives or ways that the landscape talks to people for every parcel of land. The meaning that one puts upon the land and how it is used culturally is culturally constructed. In my study, I noticed that there tended to be many different narratives or ways of looking at the landscape. There were the local view, if it was a site that was run by a group, their view. The gamers added a different, sometimes unwanted view. And then there's that of the tourists, which varied widely. This is because the way that we are bringing ourselves to the land that is not our own changes the way in which we are wanting to look at it. Another good example of this is a young child who focuses on a puddle while walking through a historic landmark. The child's main takeaway will be the puddle and the fun they had playing in it while at the site. The parents would rather the child get the history that they are focused on, and so would the site. So what we see and what we focus on is completely different. The parents are looking at the historical significance behind the site. The child, however, just looks at the puddle, and that's all they see, and that's all they care to see. So, Yuri is also talking about the expectations, and not just what they see, but their expectations that the tourists place on the locations that they are visiting in order to have what they consider an authentic experience, which might not be the authentic experience that the site itself has set up. Reference the kid. Okay, so this is from my study again. This is Alnwick Castle. I know it looks like Alnwick, but it's actually pronounced Alnwick. This is the photo that either shows the entrance to an old important castle that is over 1,000 years old, and it has a history of being important in defending English from Scottish invasions, or it's a photo of where Harry, Ron, and Hermione left the castle to go to Hagrid's hut. It depends on which point of view you look at. So hopefully this picture will help you understand the gaze just a little bit better. Okay, so there's been some really good arguments between Yuri and McConnell, and I kind of want you guys to understand that theories are always evolving. And part of the way that happens is through arguments between the scholars. So, an argument that has come up regarding Yuri is from McConnell. It is important to understand why and how he is making this argument against this theory of the gaze. Yuri fails to notice the distinction between authentic experience and inauthentic ones is one of the problems that McConnell sees. And McConnell believes that the second gaze, one that is in a way suspicious of the total visual element of the tourist gaze. The second gaze is where the tourist is aware of that fact. And he says the tourist consciousness is motivated by its desire for an authentic experience, and that the tourist may believe that he is moving in this direction, but often it is very difficult to know for sure if the experience is in fact authentic. Is it always possible that what is taken to be an entry into the back region is really an entry into a front region that has been totally set up in advance for the touristic visitation? This goes a long way to showing that the six types of backstage that I was talking about. So you have the backstage, which is typically set up completely and totally like a backstage, but is set up. So that would be like going to a movie studio and watching a taping. When you get there, it's already set up to look a certain way. So you think that you're, you know, being authentic and being there with the director and all that, but it's set up so that it looks that way and that you get that feel. And don't ever think that the lights aren't put in a proper position just so that you can get that feel. Okay. McConnell argues against Yuri when Yuri is saying something is being concealed from it. The second gaze knows that seeing is not believing. Some things will remain hidden from it. The second gaze turns back onto the gaze subject, an ethical response for the construction of its own existence. So this is saying that people tend to know that it's not real and be able to look back and say, okay, that totally wasn't real, but still believe it was, if that makes any sense. Okay. Although McConnell is arguing for the need for a wider experience than Yuri suggests, they have both been criticized by those who suggest that they focus too exclusively on the tourist experience and the subjectivity of the tourist. Little mention is given to the subjectivity of the host. In a world where affluent tourists are able to seek out experiences and gaze upon sights in worlds that are just becoming open to them, little mention is given to how this affects the host culture. So that's an argument against what they're saying, which is something that we kind of need to think about just a little bit. So, however, McConnell says a blueprint for the transformation of the global system of attractions into the enormous set of mirrors to serve the narcissistic needs of the dull egos. Yeah, and he kind of, that's just mean, but it is true, because when tourists go out to different sites, they're looking to reinforce their identity in a lot of ways by being able to compare themselves to the differences that they see within the other culture. So, or similarities, depending on what it is, and how far away they're going. But that is one thing that they are most definitely looking to do. Okay, so I'll turn to Lacey and Douglas. This is supposedly a photo of something that is traditionally Basque. It's sheep. I don't know much about Basque culture, so, you know. But the human gaze has a power of conferring value on things, but makes them cost more too. So, what they're saying there is that when people find things that are wonderful and amazing, the price goes up, both the economic price as well as the social capital. Remember, we have social capital as well. So there's no coincidence that the native and the anthropologist both seek the real observations of authentic sights and performances, denying being tourists. tourists being native ought to confer privileged insight, anthropologists are trying to understand from being native. And this is kind of saying that while at the same time you would think that being native would give you certain insights into what's going on, a lot of the times it doesn't. Anthropologists are really trying to understand from the native point of view, but because these are touristic sites, the natives' point of view has been kind of skewed in order so that it can be cashed in upon. So, tourists search for a romanticized authenticity, and that is very true. So, tourists, while a lot of them might say, I want a very authentic experience, I want to go and be a part of this culture and find out exactly what it means to be a part of that culture. In a lot of ways, they really don't want that. They want the bed and breakfast where they're served breakfast. They don't want to have to make their own breakfast because they're on vacation. They want things to be nice and neat and packaged. But in a lot of ways, that's the same quest that many anthropologists are on. They want everything to be handed to them as well. Make no mistake. So, Lacey and Douglas talk about marketing of the Basque ethnicity is more about the contemporary realities and future potentials than the preservation or destruction of a traditional cultural authenticity, seemingly endless expression of sub-ethnic differences, folkloric variations. And so this also talks about the difference in what people actually think is going on and wanting to go on and what actually is going on. So the culture tends to kind of be skewed in a lot of ways when touristic entities come in because they want to sell portions of the tourists' ethnicity and culture that look good on paper for the most part, but not others. And it's really honestly a battle between what the native population is willing to hand over to the tourists and what they're not. Tourists will never get the full 100% experience because there's always a part of that culture that is going to be held back and kept from them so they can try to keep their culture. They also talk about twin discourses of Basque modernity, economic development, and political autonomy. Their ethnic uniqueness and quaintness may be good for touristification, but it's a danger of producing excess reliance on that single activity. You see that a lot of the times with smaller groups. And while people really want to go back to the old ways of doing things, because it's so quaint and so peaceful, and they want to be tourists in that area, they don't really want to live like that. They want their nice shiny stuff, but they want to be tourists in that area. It tends to create an industry that takes away from the stuff that people think is quaint. And so there won't be as many people farming. There won't be as many people herding sheep. You see this on the Isle of Skye, where a lot of the population has had to become part of the tourist industry. And so they're not doing nearly as much in the way of herding as they used to. So stuff like this pandemic is hitting Skye extraordinarily hard, because they really rely on the money that tourism brings in. And not to mention that tourism, at least on Skye, has made it so that a lot of people have been losing their livestock due to people driving erratically, not understanding how to drive because they drive on the other side of the road, and killing off some of their livestock. Yay. Okay, so let's move on just a little bit. France denied the existence of the ethical distinction within the borders while rejecting the demands of the Basque for greater cultural respect and political autonomy. Paris is not alone in invoking the imagery of Basque quaintness for tourist promotional purposes. What they're talking about there is basically that France wanted to see everyone to see the culture of France as being one culture. And I really didn't want to put in the money for the Basqueness and the Basque people to have their own culture, but at the same time, they want to use it to bring people in. So, you know. Lacey and Douglas also say that there are strict municipality codes in most French Basque communities that dictate the preservation of traditional house styles, which kind of sucks, because the French really want that those tourist revenues to come in. They have dictated the way these people are going to live. The militants' rejection of rustic tourism remains largely at the level of verbal denouncement. So the Basque people haven't risen up against them yet and said, no, screw this. There are several cities that are prone to cultural pilgrimage into the hinterland in the search of their own Basque cultural authenticity. The direct and indirect consequences of such an imagery, such as these beautiful sheep here, were truly basically there were consequences because people were wanting to search for their history. Even within France, the French would go to these Basque villages to try to find what it was like for their ancestors who moved from the Basque areas to the cities. And that has made it so that they've had to be stagnant. The Basque areas have had to be stagnant, which kind of sucks. And so the visitors are in search of special knowledge. Always, anyone who is an outsider at some point always remains to be an outsider. There's no coming back in or being a part of something that you really aren't. One thing that's interesting that Lacey and Douglas talk about is the site, i.e. the land, or the site, what you see, is not in isolation. They find them all to be both interrelated on one level, while discrete and disconnected on another. All the dimensions of the creation and the Taurus commodification of Basque identity are intertwined. Basqueness is a sum total of the assertions and interpretations of all the various Basque identities considered here. Tourism is a business enterprise all about the image that is portrayed. And so, like I said, I'm going to put all 3 articles together. So now we're going to go ahead and go over to Bruner's article. Bruner. Okay, so this is a pretty decently done article, and it talks about the Maasai. He goes to 3 different sites. The first site is that of a plantation where the tourists get to be the colonial people and have high tea and be entertained by the Maasai that live there. The Maasai are not allowed to have any technology or anything like that showing to the tourists, although when they go back to their places of residence, they definitely have cell phones and whatnot. So that's one type of experience that tourists can have. I honestly don't think that the plantation that Bruner went to see is still in existence, but there's that. Then you have the Maasai-driven experience where people can go to their villages, and I have a video for you to watch as far as that's concerned as well. And then the third type is going to a cultural center where the Maasai, as well as other traditional indigenous people within the African continent, remember it's a continent, not a country, go and they perform traditional dances and rituals and stuff like that for people. And then once all those performances are done, the tourists are allowed to go to the outside and visit recreated ideas and villages, huts, that kind of stuff. So what Bruner does is he argues against the need for authenticity for most tourists because he says they don't really care. They really just want to have fun and do things that are unique and that they can't do on their own. They don't necessarily have to be the most authentic and have things done the exact way. They just really want to have fun. So, kind of cool. Okay. After the link for this video, you will see that there will be a couple other links. I want you to watch those. And remember, we are meeting Friday. It's our last time. We're going to do some review. We're going to talk about the end of the semester and how it's going to go. So, please, everyone come to class on Friday. I hope to see you then. Stay well, stay healthy, and I will talk to you later. Bye.